The Baptist Church in Roseau. It's 135 miles north of here, and I came down yesterday. And welcome. Glad that you're here. And I've been doing ministry for 30 years, and I'll tell you this: I don't have all the answers. I can tell you what not to do because of that. Here would be my hope. Let's just throw this out there: that you could identify where you're at in your church with small groups, and maybe where you'd like to be. And I'm going to give you some tools today and some resources to help you on that journey. You know, it takes time, it takes patience. You know, when you look at the church, we know that the church, it has to be more than Sunday morning. I mean, we gather together and we worship, and like I said, we're in process ourselves. I don't have all of the answers. But I do have two fill-ins for you right at the top of your page. Two fill in the blanks, and then we'll follow along through this note page. I hope that we can interact. If you have questions, you know, stop me. If it's not clear, you can stop me and ask a question. I'd appreciate that. Are small groups dedicated? It's a question. Are small groups dedicated to answering the real questions and meeting the real needs of its members in a holistic or an inclusive way? Do our small groups, are they, you know, you could really answer that and say, are they relevant? Are they relevant? I have, for the 30 years I've been in the church, I've utilized natural church development resources. Raise your hand. Is anybody familiar with natural church development resources? Okay. So I'm not here to sell you that, but Christian Schwartz has done a lot of writing about the church as a living organism. And so sometimes we get stuck in this idea like, how our church should be 500, our church should be 300, our church should be 3,000, or we get stuck on this number. Christian Schwartz is of the mindset to say, let's get the church healthy, and it will grow to the level that God wants it to grow to. Now, there's some resource at the very last page I've given you. So if you want to follow more information of that, you can look into that. But Christian Schwartz identifies 8 key quality characteristics to a healthy church, and they're on the first page here. I don't want to talk about these. If you can imagine, if I had a whiteboard up here that I could write on, I think if I wrote on this, I might get in trouble with a marker because that would be bad. If you can imagine a water barrel with wooden staves in it, and if the staves are at different levels, what Christian Schwartz says, there's 8 staves in the barrel. Each of those represents these areas of the church. What is the lowest stave? The lowest wood, and the water's going to come out there, right? And so what he says is identify your lowest wood piece and raise that up, and you'll keep more water in the barrel. Okay? I've taken this inventory in our church, and we've identified, one of the churches I served in, inclusive or holistic small groups, was one of our low staves. So we had to say, how can we raise that? And I'll give at the end of towards the end of this presentation, there's a little inventory on how to address that. But let's talk about the 8 staves, just so you get a framework for what I'm talking about. The first characteristic is empowering leadership. Does the church have a mood or an attitude that leaders are being equipped and empowered? Does the church have gift-oriented ministry? Do people know and are they serving in their area of giftedness? Do people have a personal, passionate spirituality? Are they growing individually in their personal spiritual life? Are there functional structures? Clear lines of communication and responsibility within the church? Is there an inspiring worship service that's uplifting weekly, edifying those who attend? Holistic small groups there, and I left it blank because that's the rest of our seminar today, is to talk about, and I'm breaking that out for you. Holistic, or I'm going to say inclusive. Do your small groups understand the dynamics of the church, and is there something for your church? You're not going to find one size fits all, one group. There's not one small group that fits all. Okay, and then also need-oriented evangelism. Is the church experiencing need-oriented evangelism? This is an area that our church is currently working on, effectively reaching out to our community. and loving relationships. So if that makes some sense, those are some things. You're here for some reason because you have a passion for small groups in some way, shape, or form. So here's where I like to start with this. If you want to know where you want to go, you need to know where you are. I wonder if you could start to think just for a minute, how many groups are there in your church right now? Now, just think in your mind, I'll give my example, and maybe you could even write a number there. We have 2 adult Sunday school classes that meet on Sunday morning. That's 2 groups. We have a prayer meeting that meets on Tuesday night. It's about 5 or 6 people. That's a group. We have a grief share group that meets. That's a group. You know, how many groups do you have during your week? And think about that. And so maybe just think about that in your setting. How many groups are there? Anything that you would constitute as a small group. I'm going to say anything from 3 to 15 or 20, you know, something in that. Then step back and look at your population and say, okay, well, we have 200 people attending church, and it looks like we have 5 groups that include 35 people. And you kind of get a gauge of like, wow, okay, maybe this is where we are. Then I think so just starting with where you are, because we have a goal in our church. We're trying to get 100% of our adults involved in some sort of a group, and we don't have that at the present time. Now, there's a question that's the next on the page there. What kind of groups are they? Are they open or closed groups? Now, as you think about that, what would you think is the difference between an open and a closed group?
It will take more than that.
Right, exactly. So is so an open group, is there an open chair? A lot of groups maybe have an evangelistic, well, we want to invite more people back next week. Invite more people back next week. Now, is an open group a good group?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. How about a closed group?
Yes.
A closed group's a good group, right? So what's the difference? What's the advantage and disadvantage of an open group?
Get more people.
You're going to get more people and you're going to grow, but you're going to lack depth and intimacy. If you keep adding new people in to an open group, you may sacrifice depth. Now, a closed group, if a group of 12 people decide to meet through the whole school year, or maybe they've met for 2 years or 5 years or something like that. What's the benefit of a closed group? Intimacy, closeness, sharing. What's the negative of a closed group?
No one else can join.
Right. So you have to have some of both. So again, I'm helping you kind of look at your situation and ask yourself the question, how many adults do we have in our church, in our congregation? And even, I would include, maybe as you're thinking about, I guess it depends where you draw the line. Do you want to talk about your high school group or your college age? Or, again, think about your groups. How many people are involved in groups? How many groups do we have? How many are open? How many are closed? What if you have a lot of groups that are already existing and are kind of closed? It's going to be hard for new people to assimilate into the body. And they're going to get a put off type of a feel. So, what's that pathway for them to get into the situation there? And plugging into your church. Because isn't that our goal, is connectivity? So those are some key questions. And then another thing is to ask, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a second, what's your church's model? What's your church model? And then the next question is, who's in charge of your small group ministry? What board? Is there a deacon? Is there a staff person? Is there a lay person? Where does it stop? Who's the champion of your small group ministry? Now, maybe that's you sitting here today. Maybe that's not you sitting here today. So if you're not the champion of your small group ministry, how you're going to take this back to somebody. I mean, take it back to your elder board or your deacon board or a staff person and say, I think we should start asking some of these questions about our small group ministry, because that's where the action's going to, that's where the budget money goes, that's where the vision goes, that's where all that stuff takes place. So figure out what's your church's model, who's in charge of that, and another key question, you know, do you have training? You know, do you train your small group leaders? We've tried everything. Let me talk for about 3 to 5 minutes about current situation. We have our church. We have what we call a spiritual growth campaign every January to March. We have about 8 weeks where there's sermon based, and when I came, it was this way. We have about 8 weeks where we have small groups and people gather, and they're groups based on the sermon. Sometimes it's based on the sermon, but there's good and bad in that, because it's kind of an open door. There's an 8-week period, and we're trying to expand from that. We have pretty good participation. We have 75 to 80 people participating. Our church is about 200 in size, and we have a lot of kids and youth, so we're trying to get up to 100 people to involve in. So, you know, we're just kind of setting goals along the way. So I think for that 8-week period of time, we do a pretty good job of training and engaging people. And then we get through Easter, and people get into spring, and they scatter. Now some of the groups continue on because they have an affinity and they've plugged in. And it's just kind of interesting in that setting that some of the same groups repeat year after year after year, you know. And so I don't know if that's a closed group per se, and we have new groups that come out of that. So there's kind of a thrust there. We're trying to get where we